Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Darling, Region 4 Senior Project Leader. Just a little bit about me. I've been with ODOT for 17 years. Been doing project leader works for almost the past decade. Before that, I worked for 14 years for two different consulting companies, one in Virginia and one in Eugene. So I've been doing project management stuff for a while now. Before I really want to get started, I want to tell you a story about the STIP, because what I'm going to kind of do is give you a high overview from the project leader perspective of how do we get projects programmed into the STIP and how you start the project initiation, and then what's your role. That's probably pretty specific, and the interest here in this room is, well, what is my role? What do you want from me, and when do you want it? So I'm going to try and keep a high-level approach to that. I'm not going to talk so much about a lot of the roles and duties of the project leader who's supposed to assemble all this and kind of manage this, but hopefully I can kind of clear up some of the mysteries of where's my role in this? What part do I play as a geologist, environmental person, or engineer? You know, what part do you want from me? So I'm going to start off talking about the STIP. How do we build it? How do we get to there? And in specific, the scoping. Because that's going to be a lot of input from the technical folks here. And then the project initiation phase, how do we get the flywheel moving? That's what I think a good analogy is. We get the EA going, and then we start getting the flywheel going to get some inertia in the project, and then we kick it off and actually start to design. Tell you a story first of all. So 17 years ago, I was pretty new to ODOT, and I worked in the T building. And they assembled, as probably has happened to you folks, I've been there a few months, and they assembled all the folks together in a room, and they wanted them to introduce them to the rest of the crews. Then we got asked some questions. I'll never forget Mike Long. Does anyone remember Mike Long? So he was my boss's boss. He asked me a question. He said, "Mike, can you tell us about the STIP?" And I'm like, "That's a good question. I'll get back to you later." That was 17 years ago. I still don't know if I really, truly understand the STIP, okay? Working on it, but I don't know if I really understand. There's STIP coordinators, and for project leader, STIP coordinators are always their new best friend, okay? So I'm gonna talk about how do we get, what is the STIP, the Statewide Transportation Improvement Program, how does things get into there, your role in that, and then start the project initiation process, okay? So this is the introduction. So I'm going to be looking at and starting at the business case development, the scoping, project selection, and then the project adoption in the STIP. So this process, and one of the things I'd love to see sometime, this shows all the different units is kind of segmented equally. And I think what would be interesting to take the racetrack and put it so where it's more time-oriented, the scale. Because I can tell you the preliminary plans phase isn't the same distance as the project initiation or even construction. So that would be an interesting, I think, development for my own use is what does this really look like for the time sequence? So we're going to start talking about business case development and go to the STIP adoption. So what happens is the different programs will put together a list of projects. And actually before this, the OTC develops a funding allocation, okay? The different business lines will put together their list of projects. Knowing how much funding they have available, they'll put a list of projects together that actually exceed that funding amount. They call it the 150% list, okay? And they'll draft some business cases. That's very good. That happens without your knowledge. What happens next is we start doing some field scoping with the teams, okay? There's these wish lists. Essentially, that's what the 150% list is. It's a wish list. This is what we'd like to do. A lot of it's what we didn't get done last STIP or the STIP before. They just kind of get pushed from one STIP cycle to the next, right? And then they go from being a low priority to a higher priority to, okay, we got to get this done. Pavement's falling apart. There's some real issues. We've had more traffic accidents at an intersection. There's a lot more there's a lot more minimum and necessary. It becomes a lot more important to get a project done if they get rolled over from one step to another. So, so we get the wish list together, the field scoping, and that's where the project leader will assemble project teams and actually go through the wish list and task everyone with, okay, what is this project? What are the components of it? What do we need? What does that actually look like as a project? Your roles as the technical disciplines is to actually put together kind of what this thing would look like. In other words, okay, if we're going to do some paving from X to Y, what kind of quantities we're looking at? What kind of guardrails do we have? Do we need to upgrade the guardrails? Are we going through a community? Are there ADA ramps to upgrade? All those different pieces, we start to assemble and put those pieces together to form a project. And then the scoping documents, these are the things that are actually created. This is deliverable. This is something that project leaders have to utilize the resources from the folks in this room. In other words, we not only need to know what is this project, but how much does it cost, the estimate. And we put that in the project-wise. And that becomes really our best estimate, our best guess at this point for the project, what we know about the project. Now this process, the scoping documents and then the project selection, we go through and actually develop the list and then refine it to 100%. And then it goes develop the final business cases and then the STIP approval and adoption. Now this process can take 3 years. From initially drafting your business cases to all the way to getting the STIP adopted and approved. For example, we're currently working on the 18 to 21 STIP, right? I'm working on a project on 3rd Street, US 23rd Street in Bend, that was scoped back in 2015, where the world has changed since 2015. ADA ramps and all that has changed. I never forget when we were scoping all the curb ramps, we used, okay, standard drawings. We'll just do standard drawings. They allocated $5,000 a ramp, no problem. Well, it's going to cost me over $1 million just to do the ramps in that corridor. Things have changed. The current cycle that we're on right now is we're developing the next STIP cycle, the 21 to 24. That allocation actually was developed in 2017. We are actually working now, 2018, 2019, on the scoping for that project. A lot of you have been involved in the scoping teams, assembling and putting together the pieces for the project, for the 150% list. And then they're starting actually these next few months to cut that list down to the 100% list. And again, your role in this is, project leaders can't do this by themselves, the area managers. That's where we need you, is your input on the scoping, and help us develop a thorough scoping project, so we know our scope, schedule, and budget. And so if we actually get this project going, we have a pretty good idea of what it's going to take. Next slide. So these are kind of again, just the pieces, the steps that'll take us from scoping to adoption. So we develop a 150% list, draft business cases. Again, this is something you're not too much involved in. Field scoping with technical resources. This is really where we need your help. Refinement of scope, budget, risk. Risk is a huge thing. That's really something we're trying to get a better handle on. It's just not a contingency, but understand the risk. And if we need to take a little deeper dive into a project to understand those risks and its impact on scope or schedule or budget. Scoping docs, they get put in the project-wise, narrative estimates, work zone, decision tree. Again, those are deliverables. The 100% list, and then final business case. The draft STIP, approval and adoption. And again, that process can take some time. Let's see. After the STIP gets adopted, what then? That takes us to the next part of the racetrack through the project development transition to project initiation. So we scoped a project, we did our work, we went out and looked at a bridge, we looked at some pavement, we looked at an intersection, we did some work on it. We've kind of forgotten about it. It's been maybe 2, maybe 3 years. Suddenly you get an email from project leader, get an email from your unit manager, hey, there's a project, it's starting off, you've been assigned to this project. And like, okay, I kind of remember that. Or maybe you don't, maybe you weren't involved in the project. Maybe you weren't involved in the scoping of the project. What's next? So this really starts, this project initiation phase starts, it could be 2, 3 years after you've scoped a project. And now we're starting to get the flywheel moving. So it's been approved. The project leader will ask the STIP coordinator to open an EA and obligate the PE phase, okay? And of course, when you start working on it, that's one of the first things you want to know is what do I charge to? The project charter, there was a draft project charter put together by the project leader that's in our scoping folder. That will start to be worked on. He'll assemble a core team, assign resources, consultant services for those folks who are utilizing consultant services contracts. Start that process. That could take 3 months, 6 months, whatever it's going to take. Initiate IGAs, access management, environmental survey, and the project kickoff meeting. And again, that could take 6 months. It could take 6 months, it could take 9 months, but we're getting the flywheel going. Getting the pieces in place ready to actually start design on the project. These are the pieces kind of looking at it. So we're going to open up PE count, expenditure count, project charter, verify the scope, schedule budget, 0 CMR, make sure our funding is in line with our budget, assign resources. And this is a big part of which the folks in this room will get a part of is what I call soft kickoff, getting the core team involved. This is what I like to do. This isn't the kickoff, this is kind of a soft kickoff. You've initiated the EA, you've gotten the EA going, you've kind of started moving the pieces. What I like to do is assemble core folks. We don't need everyone. Just assemble the core folks of the project in a room. Do we have the right project? What are we missing? What has changed in the world? Has any legislation changed? Has any settlement agreements occurred that we need to be aware of? You know, what has changed in the world since this project was scoped? And that is an invaluable tool. And again, we'll be reaching out to the technical resources in this room to make sure that we have the right project, that the world hasn't changed significantly, and what do we need to start working on now? Develop and execute consultant services contract. The project leader, the CPM will be responsible for that, unless there's, for the full service A&E contract. Some of you will be doing discipline-specific contracts, and that takes time to develop too. But for the CPMs and PLs that are doing full service A&E contracts, this is again where we're going to be asking for your help. We don't know all the disciplines. We don't know all the nuances of your business. So we're going to be asking for help to develop that scope of work. We're going to be making sure we got it right for as what we're asking for the consultant. We're going to make sure we ask the right thing for deliverables. When we develop the estimate, trying to figure out how many hours should this thing cost. I don't know, I'm not a traffic engineer if I have to design a signal. I'm going to be asking the folks in this room who are traffic engineers, how many hours does it take to, design the signalization of an intersection? And well, how many hours over the different phases of a project, right? So that's going to be a big resource. So don't be surprised when you're asked for help, when you're asked to review scopes of work, when you're asked to review cost estimates about hours. This is where we're going to need your help and input. Develop schedule, refine risk. So the project leader is going to be working on putting together a schedule for the project. And again, he'll be reaching out to folks and asking them to get involved in that. And this schedule is, as we kick this thing off, as we get this project rolling, it already has a schedule, but is the schedule correct? And he's going to be reaching out to the folks in this room. Initiate intergovernmental agreement. So this will be something with the folks who do IGAs. A lot of these are necessary to get our funding in place, especially from local partners. Make sure that funding is in place prior to kickoff. And also may be important is part of the funding for consultant services. Initiate access management process. This is one of those things that can really take more time than you anticipated for project leaders. And by statute, we're required to do certain things. We have an access management methodology that we have to develop and get out to folks, and they have 21 days to respond to that. And then there's a whole process after that. It can be very time constrained or time complicated process. And we're going to kick that process off early. I like getting the OPAL going. I mean, that's a function out of district. Get the OPAL going, do the access management research. There's a lot of things you can do to, again, get that flywheel moving, get the pieces in place so you don't slow down your project. Project-wise, third-party access. So project-wise, you need to have that set up, and that's the responsibility of the project leader. So as you start working on the project, in the initiation phase, you got a place to put stuff, right? If you don't have that place to put stuff, ask the project leader, where's project-wise? Oh, I forgot to do it. Yeah. So that's, again, it's getting the flywheel going, getting the pieces set in place so we can start the project design. And the third-party access, that's for the consultant. So after we get our A&E contract and after we issue NTP, then the project leader will be able to have the consultant get access to ProjectWise too. But that's just part of it. And that way too, if there is a consultant, when they start putting documents in the ProjectWise, you'll be able to see those. And we are moving to unified structure. I don't know if you've heard about that. We are moving to a unified structure approach, which facilitates the sharing of documents and information a lot better between staff and consultants. Survey, you can't start design unless you have survey. That's one of those things you got to start early. And the survey folks in this room, I don't know if there are, but and of course I've been asked, well, how can you start survey if you don't know your project? Well, you do. You have scoping documents. You met with your core team. You have a pretty good idea of your footprint, of your API. Why not get survey going? You can always add to it later on, but the bulk of the survey, you can get that going and get that DTM in place. So when you issue the NTP to the consultant, you've got your DTM and you can start rocking and rolling, okay? So, and of course you'll need an engineer to actually look at that, submit the request. So again, reaching out to you folks. Those are the important things that you will be a part of, and we haven't even kicked the project off, the so-called project kickoff. Okay, we're still doing a lot of work. We're getting this thing going, getting the pieces set in place to start the project. And then the project kickoff meeting is kind of the summary. It's kind of what I call all hands on deck. We get everyone together in one room. The consultant is going to be there, all the staff, all the necessary people that might have a piece in this, including public outreach, just all the different pieces, all the different people who may want to get involved in the project or should get involved in the project, put them together in one room, kick the project off. And again, that's the responsibility of the project leader to organize that, run that, and you'll be a part of that. Any questions so far? So let's take a look at the deliverables and then your roles in those deliverables. And again, these deliverables is the ultimate responsibility of the project leader to assemble, to make sure they've got these pieces, but they're going to be reaching out to the folks in this room to supply some of these things. Programming requests, the EA, the project charter, and they'll be finalizing the project charter part of this process and asking for your input. MS project schedule, we had a draft schedule come out of scoping. We're going to revisit that, put together a revised schedule. Budget zero CMR, make sure our funding is in line with our project and our budget. That's an important part because now's the time to figure out, oh, the world has changed since the 3 years we scoped it. We don't have enough money. We're really short. What do we have to do? What are our options? And that initiates the conversations with the project leader, with area and other folks. But that's pretty important to get that nailed down. Funding IGA if needed. Again, those folks dealing with intergovernmental agreements, they'll be asked to get that stuff going. Resources assigned, survey. Updated work zone decision tree. We had one coming out of scoping. Update again, make sure it's correct and up to date. Environmental scoping report, again, getting those things done early. Updated risk log, what do we know, what do we don't know, what is it that we don't know, what, and the impacts of that to our project. Executed consultant work order contract, issuance of notice to proceed. And finally, project team kickoff meeting. That's again, get everyone in the room, kick off the project. So that's the overview. Those are the pieces. You know, the project leader is really responsible for managing this, but he or she can't do this alone. They need the folks in this room to provide that technical input, to make sure we have the right information at the right time so we can start these projects off and then take it to the next milestone. And on that next milestone is going to be design acceptance, and that's when the whole design actually starts. I know Ken Patterson's going to talk about that. And that's when we actually start moving, you know, mice around on the screen and actually start designing this thing. But this is pretty important part of the process of getting that flywheel going and getting the project going. And that's all I've got. Anybody have any questions I can answer? Yes?
Overall, in the STIP selection process, if you were to make a pie chart of like projects that get selected for that are reacting to, let's say, a section of roadway that's hit its expected life versus proactive towards like population projections and meeting those types of needs, what would that pie chart look like between those two types of like reactive or proactive motivators to get a project in the STIP?
Probably depends upon the year. It's probably, yeah, that's a very good question. I think we try to not be proactive. I've been long enough with ODOT to say, we try not to be reactive. Let me rephrase that. Erase that out of the recording, right? So, we try not to be reactive, but proactive. For instance, pavement condition. Typically, district is pretty much on top of understanding the roads. They own the roads, they take care of them, they run them, and they know kind of how they're doing. And they know, especially coming out of a winter, like for us in Central Oregon, winters can just be horrible on pavement. So they do try to stay on top of it and know, hey, we've got another couple years left and we really got to get this going and we got to do something. But then there's reactive, and that's just, we're a government agency. Things occur and we react. So what does that actually look like? I couldn't tell you. But I would say that the STIP itself is pretty programmed. It's a process. Like I told you right now, earlier, that we're right now scoping for the 21 to 24, right? We actually started the funding allocation in 2017. So the process really almost started 4 years before we actually can begin projects. That requires some discipline, requires some planning, requires some thoughtfulness. Does that answer your question? I answered it without answering it. So. Yeah. Good question. Question there? Zero CMR. So CMR is a change management request, and it's a way to track budget changes, right? Funding requests and budget changes on a project, and that's one of the tools a project leader, CPM, uses to be able to, track the money, what happens to the money and the funding. If you're adding scope, adding budget, adding schedule, or changing that, no, not adding, doing any kind of changes, it's called use a CMR. It's a form to be able to track that. Zero CMR, basically it's a baseline. It's because you came out of scoping with just a spreadsheet, right? And then you have the STIP, it gets adopted, and so you have the STIP and it explains, but you don't have anything that shows, okay, where are we at now? We have that project started, but really it basically has a kind of a base, it shows the baseline of the project for the funding and the budget. Any changes then occur off that zero CMR. Make sense? Yes?
Does step 7, the initiate access management process, does that refer to like physical access to your
That's a good question. So access management, oh wow, there's a whole discussion in itself. Just trying to make sure I don't go too much in the weeds here. So access management strategy is an important part of what we do, because every approach, every access to our highway is a potential conflict, right? Which can result in accidents, et cetera. So we want to manage that access. There is policy to that. There's also a legislative mandates to how we approach access management. What we start in the project initiation phase is the research is to understanding what is out there already. In other words, if you have a section of highway, there's driveways, you see driveways, you see city streets, county roads. We want to understand what, if there's, is there a permit? Because a number of approaches may have an actual permit, a paper permit. Some may be grandfathered in with the presumed to be permitted. There may be a reservation of access in which we actually own the right to reserve access. Someone has to actually get the permit for that. What we want to understand through that corridor, what do we have? What's there? Not what we're trying to change anything yet. We just got to know what is there. And that's what the access management research really involved. And the OPAL is the official project access list. And we want to identify all the accesses, whether they have a permit or not, or paper permit or whatever. We got to know everything throughout that corridor. So that's the process. Does that help? Yeah. Good question. Any other questions? No? Good. Right, so I got. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time, and go forth and build projects. Thank you.